Welcome to the Dialogue KE. Tonight on the show, I'm joined by the program's officer at Siasa Place, Telen Zomo, and Dennis Okore, a public policy consultant, as they help us dissect the National Dialogue Committee report that was unveiled on Saturday. Karibuni sana to the show.
Thank you.
Let me begin by you, Tele. I mean, what's your impression on the report? I'm sure you've read.
I think so far there are a few interesting things, a few interesting suggestions that they have made. But I think one thing that we're starting to see is that this is more or less similar to what we've seen in the past, where politicians come together and they try and look at their own interests and try and figure out, okay, what exactly do we need? Do we want to add more positions in the constitution? Something similar to the BBI, although not as it doesn't have as many proposals as the BBI did, but it looks as though they want to more or less change certain aspects of the constitution, especially when it comes to matters of government, when they talk about entrenching the position of the prime CS or prime minister into the constitution, when they talk about positions of leader of opposition into the constitution. So it looks as though they are more or less trying to look at changing the governance structures. I think on the matter of cost of living, which has been a big issue and has been a big conversation, I don't think that was really addressed. Yeah, they spoke a little bit about wastage in government, especially when it comes to matters of traveling, but that's something that we've known for a long time. But there isn't any proposal as far as lowering the cost of living in the report.
All right. Dennis, let me get to you. I mean, what's your general impression on the report that you've waited for so long?
Yeah, I think it's an anticlimax to start with, because when this committee was put together, the whole country has been waiting for a magical moment. This magical moment was thought that would come with new things. And as Taylor said rightfully, we've been this road before, and we are just back into a period of political jostling that is about to unfold, where people will align along interests. We've already seen the opposition team from Azimio already aligning into two, and that's quite interesting. I'm sure also on the Kenya Kwanza side, they are divided opinion about the way forward about this. But looking at how the president commented that he's okay with it, I think that has an indication on how it will go. But I think we need to see also how this will pan out in Parliament once the 21 days has elapsed, so that we see how this comes to force. But generally, there's really nothing new. It's just the usual stuff. And actually, some of the things that the committee has taken as substance, some of them really do not require a committee of such. It just requires leadership and pronouncement and making the right decision. So I think in some way I also see we're being taken for a ride, but let's see how it goes.
All right. Tele, do you think this report has actually fulfilled the expectations of Kenyans?
No, I don't think so. I think that if you look at the process or how we got to creating this committee, it was through what they were calling manamanos and all the protests that were taking place in the country, and the protests were really taking place because people were tired of the cost of living. I don't think many Kenyans were really interested on matters to do with constitutionality or changing the constitution. I think people were just fed up with issues of cost of living. That's what really brought these people on the table. But that, as much as I know the former vice president, who is the co-chair, has tried to say that they have spoken or tried to speak to it, it's not an issue that has been really dealt with. So I don't think it's speaking to the interests of Kenyans. I think it is speaking to the interests of our politicians.
Yeah, because they actually recalled the Treasury CS to be able to explain to them the issue of the cost of living. And some of the recommendations in the report are all arms of government to cut travel expenditure by 50%, SRC to review daily subsistence allowances for state and public offices with an aim of reducing the cost by 30%, and the road maintenance levy and fuel anti-adulteration levy to be reduced by 5 shillings and 3 shillings respectively. I mean, Dennis, do the proposals respond to the question on the cost of living?
Yeah, I think how I see the cost of living is also an issue of sustainability. and it requires a raft of measures. One, in terms of leadership.
Yeah.
If you look at how government is run in Kenya over all the regimes, one cross-cutting theme has been public wastage. And I think that is something that will really demonstrate great leadership. And I think all the Kenyan presidents, including the present president, I think there's more talk to it, but there's really more than meets the eye. The second thing is about taking firm steps to really address what the real issues are in terms of cost of living. And here is looking at even how the policies that are being implemented currently are elevating the issue of inflation. You see, the government has taken policies that are favoring government in terms of revenue, but on the other side, it's bringing unintended consequences whereby we're finding that what we call the common mwananchi, they are struggling. Each and every day we wake up to a new tax, and someone was even joking that we should be prepared for an El Nino tax. Yeah, so everything is being taxed. So when you see when you hear the government talking about, the only thing they talk about is fertilizers, and they have given farmers fertilizer, and now the cost of living will go down. But if you look at the tax burden, it's something that should worry us, and it really puts the issue of cost of living to be something that will keep on skyrocket. But as that has happened, also when you look at the recent weeks, we've seen almost 10 companies issuing profit warnings. And what does that tell you is that there's no enabling environment for these businesses to do business the way they are. And what we are likely now to see is job losses, and what that has a lot of ramification from a socioeconomic perspective, and even looking at the rise of other things like crime and all that kind of thing. But, and we're just also not yet fully out of the post-pandemic challenge. So it's quite a bit hard, and it really requires firm leadership to really address this thing of cost of living, and it can't be business as usual. And I'm just afraid, because with this report being launched, we might have another 6 months or even 1 year of political activity, because one of the recommendations they're talking about is going to audit the 2022 election.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that one will be a hot potato, because there's never been leadership to really address this issue. And you could remember we had, after the post-election violence of 2007, we had a lot of reports, some of the recommendations, like Kriegler report. These are things which still has a lot of pending issues. So I'll be surprised they will do some magic with this. So we're still in for problems, I think.
I will get to the electoral justice question, and let me get to you, Tele. I mean, do you think this is the issue of the cost of living has really been politicized?
I don't know if it has been politicized per se, because it's an issue that is actually affecting Kenyans, right? It's something that, even for us, I think we feel it. We feel the difference, at least in the last 1 year, considering how many taxes have been introduced. I would say this. I think I did not think that we needed a committee, a national dialogue committee, to deal with cost of living. I think this is something that really Parliament should have been dealing with, right? Because it is their job. Number one, they're the ones who make the budget, right? And they're the ones who are responsible for the finance bill, responsible for putting in taxes. Within that process, there is public participation. He was talking about the companies that have been issuing profit warnings. If you go back to the finance bill, if you look at the public participation that was taking place, you will notice that some of these organizations, whether it was Kenya Association of Manufacturers or KEPSA and other private sector bodies, were actually trying to warn Parliament that the finance bill, as it was, the introduction of a lot of taxes would have a negative effect on business, but they didn't necessarily take that into consideration. So I don't feel that this is something that needed this committee to deal with. I think it could have been dealt with in Parliament and also with the executive by trying to put in the right policies. So I don't understand why really we needed a dialogue committee for this.
All right, let's shift gears to electoral justice, and some of the recommendations are the evaluation of the 2022 election process, as well as the IBC Reconstitution Selection Panel to be expanded from 7 to 9 members. Another recommendation in the report is the presidential election petition to be heard and determined within 21 days from 14 days, and legal reforms passed less than 18 months before the election to take effect in the next electoral cycles. Is this an answer to the question of electoral justice that we've experienced as a nation, injustice rather?
Yeah, I think something that is interesting is that Kenya is always perpetually in a state of anticipating the next election. And I think that is something very unfortunate, because if you look at the conversation around the proposed areas, it's purely political. The political class are the ones who are jostling. And I think in some way it takes us ways back to the 90s. The IPPG process, where, there were inter-party jostling for how the electoral processes will run. And I think that is something that we like to see happening. And one of the things that is interesting is that the real issues that have caused us to have divisions during elections, I think there's still more to meet the eye in terms of that. When we are looking at the issue of the Electoral Commission, I think in Kenya in the past it has always been the one who decides, the referee, is almost sure that they will win the match. And I think that's the case for the electoral body. The other thing that is also interesting, which you haven't mentioned, is the issue of the borders. So you see there is already a conversation of coming on how they want to do delimitation of some of the borders. That is something also quite interesting. But the question here is who benefits? Yeah, who benefits? When you talk about electoral justice and even the proposals from this committee, who benefits? Very few proposals really look at the common man, the Wanjiku. And if you look at even like he's mentioned something about the public participation. If you look at the 2010 constitution, it's kind of framed as a people-driven constitution. Of course, there are varied viewpoints around it. But one of the things is that what is the threshold of these constitutional proposals that are being proposed by the committee from a point of public participation? How are the people informed? And are these the pertinent issues that regards elections that we need to really solve? Because one of the biggest things that our elections lack is issue of transparency. Yeah? Yeah, we vote, but we don't know where the decisions are made. Like, I think that is something we still don't have a commonality around it. I think the 2002 moment is still been deficient in the last, in 2007, 2013, and the most recent election. So I don't think we are still there in terms of electoral justice, and it requires more. It requires leadership, it requires institutional, it requires legal reforms, but who benefits? I think it's a question we need to ask.
All right, tell you, I guess you've seen the recommendations in matters of electoral justice. Are they a magic bullet to the problems that we face as a nation in matters of election disputes?
I think Dennis mentioned something very important earlier, which is the Kriegler report.
Yeah.
If we could have implemented the Kriegler report fully, I think it would have solved a lot of our problems. If we are unwilling to implement it, what makes us think that now we're going to implement these new recommendations, or whatever the audit will say, to try and address these issues? What makes us think that now this will solve it? I don't think so. Another thing is, we have to ask ourselves on the question of where do we say the role of the Supreme Court is in matters of election? Because are we now saying that the Supreme Court rulings should simply be ignored, because one group or one team does not necessarily like what they say? I think when the Supreme Court rules on an election, it's very important to hear and listen to what they have to say. I think they speak well on matters to do with elections. People agreed with the Supreme Court when under Maraga, when they nullified the elections. They agree with them now when they support, or they accept the election results. So there's a question of, number one, where does the Supreme Court ruling lie in all of these things matters to do with elections? And number two, as I said, I think if we are unwilling to implement the past recommendations, I'm not sure that these other recommendations are going to help us solve anything.
So we need to relook on the previous reports on the Kriegler report.
Yeah,
to be able to. All right, and I mean, right now IBC is not fully constituted, and some of the recommendations actually will require us as a nation to go to the referendum. The issue of the establishment of the office of the opposition leader with 2 deputies, and the entrenchment of the office of the prime cabinet secretary in the constitution. I mean, as a nation, are we really prepared for a referendum?
Yeah, I think we are not prepared, definitely. And it takes us back to the framing. Like, if you look at the 5 areas where they were framing the issues that the committee was to look at, I think within the committee there were so many lawyers who could have foreseen this. And to some extent, you could see, like, you could think maybe this was a buying time tactic, so that as we come from this Mandamano period, there's a kind of lull where there's some discussion somewhere. And I think the tragedy is that as a country, our leadership is defined, or our national agenda is also defined by so many committees. And he has said we have so many reports, and that's the truth. Yeah. So if you look at what they're proposing, and it will involve constitution, and we might, though I still feel like the issue of going for a referendum is still far-fetched, because there's also budgetary issues when it comes to a referendum, and the framing of the referendum question requires quite a lot of time. So those things could be there, but I don't think we are ready for a referendum, because there are many things to be in place to ensure that we have a credible referendum like 2005. Yeah.
All right. Charlie, are we ready for a referendum?
No, I think I agree with I agree with Dennis on this issue. As I said before, this is just politicians looking after their own interests. I mean, we're basically now talking, I think, about we're trying to sneak in a conversation here about the system of government. I think now when you start talking about a leader of official opposition, we've already seen, by the way, in Parliament, that now cabinet secretaries are appearing before plenary, which was never the case. There seems to be this conversation that people want to have, whether the presidential system is working or it's not working. We seem to want to have it, but we're only having it in as far as positions are concerned, not how the system itself is actually working. But I think something also very interesting that we need to remember, that some of these recommendations are not actually new. You remember last year, the president had a memo to Parliament where these were some of the recommendations that he had put in place. So it's as if there seems to be an interest, even on his side, as much as he was against BBI, to seem to want to tweak or change some of the constitutional aspects. But I don't think we're ready for a referendum. I think it right now, with where the economy is, number one, and the challenges that we're facing, I think we have much more pressing issues than going for a referendum to change some of these things.
All right. Now, on Thursday, the Azimio leader will give the direction in regards to the report. I mean, I know we cannot presume what he's going to say, but do you think this is actually a red flag?
No, I don't think it's a red flag, because I think as a political leader who has a substantial majority and his pronouncements matter, I don't think it's a red flag because he has to pronounce himself either way, and he will have an opinion just the way, same way the president has done. But more importantly, what we would like to see is, or hear is what is the way forward for the country. And of course, whatever he says or does not say will have some ramifications. But it's just to endorse the idea that this conversation is for politicians. Yeah, it's coming out very clearly. Because the common Mwananchi, I don't think they will even read the 259 pages of the document, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the former prime minister said he had not read it, so he wanted to read it so that he can comment about it. But ideally, it's something before even you read, you can already see where the issues are. So I don't think it's a red flag. It is in its right to pronounce himself, but now how people will react to that, I think, is now what we need to see. What will it really mean, and also how the government will take that. But I don't think it should be an issue because he informed the process, him and the president, to form the committee. So he rightfully has a voice into that.
All right. We saw the bipartisan talks fail for the first time, and then now we have the National Dialogue Committee, and the president has actually congratulated the team for the work, saying that they have done a good job. But now we are waiting for the opposition leader to give his remarks. I mean, if he does not agree with this, what next?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things I think we're seeing, first of all, coming from the report was that if you look at the Azimio team, you already have a number of people who have come out to, rubbish, or not, yeah, rubbish the report, including individuals who are sitting in that committee. We saw that with the former CS Eugene Wamalwa. We've seen it with Martha Karua, and of course, we're seeing now reports in newspapers that the former president himself seems not to have been a fan of the president. That's if we are to believe the reports that we're reading in the newspaper. I think what the former prime minister is going to try and do is to try and get consensus within his team. I think that's what the period between now and Thursday is about. It's about speaking to the people, speaking to the individuals in Azimio. If he does not accept the report, where it's going to be a very tricky situation, because now we're going to have to ask ourselves, does that mean that they will be going back to the streets, right? Will the president accept for there to be another, more dialogue? I think it will be a very tricky situation if he does not accept it. I think we'll just have to wait and see what he says the way forward would be. But hopefully with that we don't get the violent protests again in the country. I think that is the one thing I would hope doesn't come back.
All right. Moving forward, I mean, the talks, the report is already out. The former prime minister can agree with it, and he can also not agree with the report. I mean, what next as a nation if he doesn't?
No, I think for now it's an opportune time for Kenyans to really reflect and think about the future of the country from a perspective of what is it that we can do as a people. And one of the things at a personal level I've been thinking about is to look at where we've come as a country and where we really want to go.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I like is the Rwandan model, where they call for a national grassroots focused meeting. It's a conference that runs all throughout the week. And here, people talk about issues that really affect them. And the president also comes to attend it. And the reason why I'm referencing this is that as the people who elect leaders, as the people who elect the politicians, we have lowered down some of our standards as a people. And this has in turn come to hurt us. So I think it's a moment of reflection, and it shouldn't be a moment for despair. But one of the things at our individual level, in our areas or our spheres of influence, we have to start controlling the narrative as a people so that we start championing the future we may want to see. Of course, that's too aspirational because as we speak, everyone is being beaten by this thing called the cost of living. And sometimes you cannot even think straight because in a matter of weeks, people will be back to school and it will quite be heavy everywhere. So it's not a time to go back to the streets. It's not a time to take actions which can further aggravate our situation, but to think about what kind of country we want to make at our own individual level. Because I think the politicians have betrayed this country, unfortunately, and they will want to continue doing that at their own expense. So irrespective of what they said, I think we need to take charge of our destiny.
Okay, as Kenyans, we need to take charge of our destiny. I guess that's a very good point to end our discussion tonight. Many thanks to you, Dennis Okore,
Yeah.
a public policy consultant, and Telenzomo, the programs officer at Siasa Place. And thank you so much to you at home for watching the program. And on behalf of the whole team that made this broadcast a success, have yourselves a blessed night. My name is Kennedy Kimani, and my co-presenter on the sign language interpretation has been Boniface Moridi.